Hi everyone! Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so YouTube keeps showing you more content like this. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let's begin. I was not supposed to be on FM 2325 that night, and I can give you a handful of reasonable excuses. My supervisor at the HVAC shop in San Marcos kept me late. The summer heat was refusing to die, pressing down like a hand on the back of my neck, even after sunset. My girlfriend Mara and I had fought over the phone because I said I'd make it to her sister's cookout in Wimberley, and then I didn't. All of that is true, and none of it's right. The real reason was smaller and meaner. The real reason was I felt guilty, and I wanted a road I used to know to make me feel like I had been forgiven. The air at 11 in. August carries a special kind of weight in the hill country. Cedar and limestone, the faint sweetness of pasture. Grass that's been scythed down by the sun, the warm dust you taste even with the windows up. My truck's AC fought it like a tired boxer leaning on the ropes. I turned off Ranch Road 12, where the Buc-ee's billboard throws a grin into the night, and drifted past Jacob's Well Road, past houses sleeping under live oaks and the lone taqueria with a flickering open sign. Every now and then, my headlights slid over a deer in the ditch, frozen and folded, eyes catching the light like dropped coins. For a while, the road was mine. I wanted the low-water crossing. There are a dozen around Wimberley, little dips in the road where a creek or a sleeve of the Blanco climbs over concrete when the sky opens up. You learn as a kid to respect those dips. They feel tame when dry, and that's the trick. One good storm, and that trick will kill you. There are signs everywhere that say, "Turn around, don't drown." People still try. I had tried once in a storm. Years ago, I still have the scar along my forearm where a culvert mouth tried to keep me. The crossing I wanted sat off a smaller lane. A slice of pavement that didn't have a name I can remember, only a county number on a bent sign and a mailbox shaped like a bass. I hadn't seen it in years. Back then, it felt like the place the night stored its extra dark. Kids dared each other to stand in the center and call for the bell. It was a stupid legend. The idea was that an old mission church sat somewhere upstream, and every time someone underestimated the water and died, the bell would ring once at the crossing. If you stood on the concrete and called for it, you might hear it answer even with the creek dry. We tried it once the summer after our classmate Kara drowned on the Blanco. She wasn't swept at a crossing. She leaped from a rope into a slick pool and never came back up. That didn't stop us. We stood on concrete baked to a skillet and shouted for a sound that would make it all make sense. Nothing rang that day, but when the first fall thunderstorm hit and I drove across late for work, I looked in the mirror and thought I saw Kara sitting in the bed of my truck, calves tucked under, skin the color of river mud. That was 13 years ago, and every time the weather turns, I hear myself ask why I didn't shout louder. I took the lane by muscle memory and almost missed it because of the construction barrels. Somewhere along this summer, the county had half-heartedly decided to fix potholes, then given up. The road narrowed and fell, dust rising in a beige cloud behind me. The trees on either side closed in, the kind that twist like they've grown around a fist. When the crossing finally appeared, the concrete lip shone like bone under the headlights, and the creek below it murmured slow and patient. No rain, no danger. Just the low voice of water working at its bed, because that is what water knows to do. I pulled up, killed the engine, and let the night step closer. Away from highway noise, you start to hear the other clock. Grasshoppers that rattle like loose screws. A dog yapping to properties over. The river's mouth talking to itself. Heat still radiated off the truck hood and pressed against my knuckles. I sat on the driver's seat with the door open and tried to care about the fight with Mara, about the job I pretend I'm going to leave, about how I am 34 and living 2 minutes at a time. None of it moved. It was all a weight that shifted in place. Then I heard the bell. It wasn't loud. It didn't clang in the air like a hammer on iron. It was more like the idea of a bell, more like the memory your ear keeps after a sound ends. It came from upstream, where the creek narrowed into brush and driftwood piles, and the glow of moonlight on water turned to a pale ribbon. It was one slow note, and then nothing. I looked around and told myself it was a cowbell from one of the ranches that flanked the water. I told myself there are perfectly normal reasons for strange noises in the country. I told myself a lot of things because I recognized the chill that started in my forearms and moved outward, the way cold sometimes blooms behind heat. I walked down the incline onto the concrete, and my boots made that small, hollow sound make on a bridge, a sound like something's not quite touching. The water slid over the far lip of the crossing in a thin sheet like silk. It was low enough to walk across with dry feet if you were careful. Another bell note came, not louder. Closer. I flicked my mag light down the upstream side and landed on a line of tire tracks aimed crooked. They cut through the sandy shoulder and angled into the brush, as if whoever made them tried at the last second to avoid the water, thread their way between two willows, and failed. The tracks broke off where the ground gave to water. A half moon of taillight plastic lay in the sand like a blood-red grin. My skin prickled, and a part of my brain I am not proud of started counting seconds to see if the bell would ring again. If it did, it would mean something. I didn't know what. I pulled my phone. 1 bar. I tried 911 anyway. It hung on the handshake and then dropped. I raised the phone like that would help and turned in a circle, looking for the glimmer of a license plate underwater. If a car had gone in, at this depth, that plate should be catching my light and winking back. The creek was glassy and slow, the brown-green of tea. Ripples moved in rings from the far bank where something disturbed the surface. A frog, I told myself. Maybe a snake. The water smelled like wet penny when I stepped closer. Hello, I called, and instantly regretted the word because of how thin it sounded in the dark. My voice went up the creek and met the big silence that lives under small sounds. Is anyone down there? Are you hurt? Feet shuffled in the brush behind me, where the road shouldered up to the slope. I spun, beam punching through cedar branches, and found a woman standing where my taillights had painted the night red. She wore jeans and a dark t-shirt soaked to the chest. Her hair hung in ropes. It took me longer than it should have to notice. She was holding a child's shoe, a little blue sandal with a Velcro strap. She cradled it like you'd hold a bird you haven't decided to let fly, ma'am, I said, and my voice was already in that careful way you speak when you're trying not to scare someone who might be hurt. Did you come off the road? Oh, she didn't answer. She stepped down the incline one slow foot at a time and stopped when the water touched the toe of her boot. Her face looked younger than I expected, early 20s maybe, but there was a black stamp behind her eyes. You don't get overnight. She lifted the shoe and held it up in the light like a warrant. Is there a child in the water? Said, words tripping over themselves. Is someone still in the car? She shook her head once, and her mouth opened and closed. Her lips were blue. She turned and looked upstream, and then I heard the bell a third time and knew with the kind of knowledge that doesn't ask your permission that it was ringing because of me. Some part of the night had weighed me on its hand and found a debt. I couldn't get the door, the woman said finally. He wanted the window. He kept asking where the button was. I stepped toward her and put my free hand up, the way you do for a skittish animal. Okay, we're going to get help. I'm going to try again for a call. Where is the car? She turned those stamped eyes back to me, and for a second they slid past me to my truck. to the outline of the cab and my jacket hooked over the back of the seat through the open door. And something like revulsion washed over her face. "You drove back," she said. "How did you drive back?" "I didn't drive back," I said, not sure why my heart was suddenly pounding like I'd run a hill. "I just got here. My name's Nate. I'm going to get you to sit, and I'm going to try one more time to call." "Koo never drove back," she said softly. And then her eyes rolled hard to the left and locked on a spot under the far bank where roots made a little cave. She dropped the shoe. It hit the water and sank with a slow grace that turned my stomach. She put both hands to her mouth, as if the rest of her would spill out if she didn't hold it in. The creek moved. That's the only way I can say it. It had been sliding like a pelt over the concrete, a thin, gentle sheet. But at the far edge where water fell into deeper pool, a line buckled and a push came, dull and heavy, like someone rolling a mattress toward us. The bell rang again, and the sound traveled through water and concrete instead of air. My flashlight beam trembled when I realized the little depth pole that the county keeps on the downstream side had changed. The numbers were the same, but they weren't as tall as they had been. The white paint near the base wore a bearded slick of moss that hadn't been there a minute ago. A flood wave doesn't always look like a wall. Sometimes it arrives like a decision has been made on your behalf. I grabbed the woman's wrist and found it cold, and for a second, my fingers slipped like there was nothing to close on. Like her bones were watered too. "We need to move," I said. "Now?" She let me pull her up the incline. The water slid faster behind us and made a sound like a hand rubbing a pane of glass. My phone blinked and I tried 911. Again, and this time it malted the green bar all the way to the end before dropping to dead gray. I cursed and turned toward my truck and froze. There was a man sitting in my driver's seat. He had my posture with one arm on the wheel and one at his side. He had my shoulders. He had the way my neck sits like it never learned how. He was me. That fact arrived without drama. It landed with all the weight of a bolt sliding into the right groove. He turned, and in the mirror of his face, I watched him see me. My hand found the woman's and crushed it. She didn't flinch. She stared with that same stamped emptiness as the person in my truck reached and turned the key, and the engine clattered awake into idle. The radio lit, no station name, just the orange backlight and the dim suggestion of numbers. A voice came out. The speaker in my door does this thing where it muffles male voices to a wet-mouthed monotone. That's how I recognized it as mine. "Do not stop," the radio me said. "Turn around. Go to the highway. Do not stop at the crossing." My flesh, me, wanted to obey him so badly, my knees turned stupid. I had the thought that if I jumped in the truck and listened and accelerated, and got back to Ranch Road 12, I could reach Mara's place in 20 minutes, and her porch light would be on, and everything would slide back into its track. Then the bell rang again, and the far bank groaned like a house, and the smell of the creek deepened into rot, and the woman tugged once at my hand and whispered a name in a voice of ground glass. "Evan," she said. "Please, please." Toes. I don't know how to tell you the next part without making myself into something I'm not. I have replayed the choice until the grooves are smooth. I had the woman's hand. I had my truck with my voice in it. I had the creek climbing into itself and the bell turning the night into a struck plate. I had a name I did not know in my ear, and somewhere out there maybe a child who wanted the window button. I left the woman and went to the water. It was lower than the sound suggested, and that is what gets you. Your eyes tell you one thing, and your body reads the slope different. I stepped onto the concrete, and the slick moss reached up like a hand, and I went to my knees. The current felt slow until it touched the back of my calves. Then it was a hook. I planted the flashlight beam on the far bank and aimed for the root cave where she'd stared. Somewhere behind me, she spoke again, and the words dragged at my spine, and I told myself that if I could just get my hands on whatever's there. If there was a car down there, if there was a seatbelt stuck in a latch and a small body fighting the heavy quiet. If I could get fingers under metal, if. My feet went out from under me. The water accepted me without surprise. They tell you not to stand in moving water because it's the way the luck runs out for people who are sure they can. I felt the current to use my legs like a lever. I slammed shoulder first into the downstream side, where the concrete broke over into depth. For a second, I was what the creek wanted to be, a weight being moved from one place to another. Then my palm found the edge and stuck. Algae slurred under my fingers. The water folded me with a patience that felt like pity. There are sounds I will never put into other words. The song of a seatbelt catching, the small hollow click in a car door handle that says no. The way a child coughs underwater in your head because you have decided that is what was true. The bell rang and rang. The radio in my truck spoke through. The open door, and I heard my own voice begging me not to stop, and I hated him with a clean hate that cleared my sight. The far bank changed again, and driftwood stacked into a bad jaw. Something floated past my face with a lazy spin. The blue sandal tapped my cheek and went on. I held as long as I could. When I finally let go and let the water take me, it did not take me far. An arm pinned like a bar across my chest and hauled. The woman had a strength that didn't match her size. She dragged me up the incline in a slither of rocks and knees, and I spat, creak, and bile, and the taste of rust. And when I blinked, the water out of my eyes, I saw a second vehicle nose down at the edge of the crossing. An older Ford with a work rack and a smashed fender, doors open to the night. And I saw a man coming around its hood with a rope looped over his arm. And the man was me again. But it wasn't the me in my truck. It was me from a summer, I think. I had, when my hair was longer and my belly flatter, and I wore the ugly silver ring Mara hates. His face looked at mine, and his disgust lifted like a stink from a swamp. He did not talk to me. He talked to the woman. "I told you you cannot keep doing this," he said. The rope went around my chest, and I properly learned then what being handled feels like when you are the thing people lift onto a shelf they don't want to look into. The woman touched my face, and for a second I felt cold lake hands, and then she was just a girl soaked to the bone and staring past me into the root cave, as if her eyes were the last thing that might fit. "Is there a child?" said again, and the way my voice broke made the other me flinch. He looked at my truck, idling, and he looked at me, and he looked at the creek and tossed the coil aside and shut my door. The voice on the radio silenced like a throat cut. He turned the key, and my engine died. "No," the woman said. "Not for you." When the flood came, it did it how you fear it will. It hit the far edge and hunched and stood up into a dark back and took the crossing in a single breath. The rope bit my ribs when the water reached for me, and in the scramble to get to the top of the incline, something under the flood touched my ankle with a light, polite pressure that felt like a hand checking your temperature. I screamed like I was young. I screamed a name I have never spoken aloud because it lives in my mouth unasked like a prayer. Kara. I know I screamed her name because the other me turned and showed me a face wrecked with pity and an old, relentless grief, and I knew he carried the same mouth petition. We are all just loops, retracing the roads we take on the worst night of our lives. We made it to the truck. The woman climbed into the other Ford without a word and put her forehead on the wheel like the little engine inside had gone quiet, and it might start again if she whispered into it. My not now me, left without lights and without looking back. I helped the woman in a way that wasn't much help at all, because what help is there? The bell rang one more time, dull and spent. Dawn looks gray in the hill country until it doesn't. When the light came proper, it was already hot. I do not remember falling asleep, only the relief of not hearing water. I woke in the driver's seat of my truck with my shirt glued to my back. The floorboard stank like creek. The radio was dark. My phone sat on the dash in a puddle of itself. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and my mouth half open like I'd been telling myself to wake up and finally had. Something scraped the road nearby, and I turned to see a man in a straw hat pushing a mailbox post into the shoulder with his boot. He looked over at me and did the neighbor nod. "You get caught in last night's rise?" he asked. "I think I missed it," I said, and my voice tried to make the word into something it wasn't. "Anyone have trouble here?" He squinted at the concrete, and then at the depth pole, and then at me. And I could tell by the set of his mouth that he was calculating whether I was the kind of person you'd tell a thing to. He hopped the shallow ditch and came closer and pointed with 2 fingers across the creek. In a wedge of bare ground where the water had eaten at the bank and left a slice of clay, a cluster of crosses leaned under a live oak, sun-beaten wood, plastic flowers bleached to chalk. The nearest cross had a plaque screwed to it. The letters were deep enough to hold shadow. I knew the names before I read them. I knew the dates before I saw them. The plaque said Nathaniel Carver and Evan Carver, August 12, 2007. I did not know how to breathe with my name there. I did not know what to do with the date. It was 13 years ago on paper, and it was last night in my hands. The straw hat man tugged at the rim and studied my face, and then said the kind of thing people say when they do not want to disturb the ghosts that clearly ride inside your skin. "Some years, the water takes more than it gives," he said. "Folks leave flowers. I come out and write the posts when the ground goes soft." "I didn't die," I said, and the words sat like a loose tooth. "I'm right here." He blinked slow and tipped his head. "I can see that. I am right here." "I can see," he said again. And then he walked away like you do when you have offered what you can, and anything else would be an intrusion. I stood there until sweat drew a tight shirt of itself around my back and neck. I crossed the concrete that was white and harmless in the daylight. And the creek went on talking in its soft voice, and I bent under the live oak and touched the plaque, with my name ground into it. The metal was warm. When I pressed my thumb into the second date, that warmth turned to something like a pulse. I took a picture because that is what you do when reality leans, and on the screen my name blurred, while the rest stayed clear. When I looked with my eyes again, the letters were crisp as a carpenter's corner. I sat there long enough that a line of ants used my boot as a landmark, and then I went home by the highway and did not stop in town. Mara didn't believe me, and you would not have either. That's not a judgment. It was a story that stank of sweat and fear and night. I left the part about seeing myself out because that is the part that sounds like you want attention. Like those black-eyed children's stories people share from the gas pump in Lampasas. I stuck to facts. A woman in the dark with a child's shoe. Tire tracks that ended in water with no car to match. A bell at midnight in a county that barely remembers who built its churches. A plaque with my name on it from a summer when I was working at the feed store and drinking warm beer behind the wash. She listened like a person on the far side of glass and asked me if I had been drinking. Then she cried because she thought I was making fun of her sister's cookout without meaning to. Then she went quiet, the way a backyard goes quiet when the neighbor's dog stops barking and you realize the night is listening too. I sent the picture of the plaque to my email and opened it on my laptop and zoomed in. The letters held, sharp and dark. I looked up the paper for August 2007 in the haze-free press archives and found a small item about 2 cousins swept off a low crossing outside Wimberley. Names withheld, sheriff's office searching. Later, another item about a memorial planned by family. That was all. No resolution. It could be anything. It could be anyone. It could be me and Evan if we had been a different version of us on a night when the sky decided we did not belong. I stared at the second entry until the letters swam and the page looked like water seen through heat. That night, I woke to a sound I could not place, and for a long minute I lay there inventorying my world. Box fan. Fridge motor. A car idling somewhere up the block. A belt whine. The sound was none of those. It was smaller and nearer. It took me a breath to realize it was coming from the nightstand. My phone screen was dark. The speaker was lit. I heard my voice on the speaker. It was the voice I get when I leave a voicemail in a hurry. Throat tight, words chopped. The message timestamp said 2:13 a.m. and the date was yesterday, and the caller ID said unknown. The message was 6 seconds long, and I do not remember leaving it because I did not leave it. It was me saying what the me in the truck had said. But the tone was wrong. There was something under it. Not water, not wind, not fear. It sounded like someone learning to speak by listening to you breathe. Do not stop, my voice said. Turn around. Do not stop. The bell rang, faint enough that I could pretend it was something else. I told myself 100 reasons, and then I got up and went to the kitchen and poured water and stared through the window into the dark square that held the yard and the indifferent moon. My phone lit again. Unknown. I let it ring, and it stopped. And in the silence, a sound came from the porch. Tap, tap, tap. It was not the knocking of a person who wants to be polite. It was the sound of fingers counting. 1, 2, 3. I thought about Kara. I thought about the blue sandal. I thought about the woman's eyes when she looked through me to the open truck. I went to the door and told myself I would not open. It's fall. I put my palm flat against the wood and felt cold staining through. The tap hesitation tap happened again. Lower now, near the threshold. I could feel the count in my hand. It stopped. I breathed. The world held dot in the morning. The porch boards bore 5 wet handprints, small and precise, in a line toward the door. Not child small. Smaller. Each print was just a little broader than my thumb. I cleaned them and promised myself I would not go back to that crossing, and meant it the way people mean it when they swear off an old habit in the light. I took the highway into town for a week straight, past the shops where they sell river tubes and the hardware store that still orders my preferred AC filters. Past the church that set out pallet after pallet of bottled water during the freeze. I slept with a white noise app rolling so the bell could not find my ear. I answered Mara on the first ring and said yes to company. I said yes to simple errands. I said yes to the idea that we have our one life and you steer it where you can. On the 8th day, I was driving past the feed store and saw a woman in a dark t-shirt holding a blue sandal at the edge of the lot where it meets the ditch. She looked up when my truck rolled by, and her eyes were exactly the stamp I remembered. She lifted the shoe the tiniest bit, as if to ask this one last time. My hands turned the wheel. My foot found the brake. I stopped. I write this the night after. I write this because I told myself last time I would warn people, and I did not. And maybe that is why the bell rings for me. If you find yourself on a farm road in Hayes County and the concrete dips and the water moves lazy and the air holds warm and wet and a bell sounds that is more memory than metal, do not stop. If your radio offers your own voice, do not listen. If a woman asks you whether you drove back, do not think you can make it true. There are crossings that are not meant to be crossed, and there are debts you think are yours to pay that are actually invitations you should refuse. I will go now. The phone has started ringing again. The screen says unknown. The porch boards will hold the shape of smaller hands. The plaque under the oak will show names you do not want to learn how to read. If you pass by and see fresh flowers there with my surname on a ribbon, do not pull over. The bell is not for you yet. 'Tis for me, and I am late. When I step outside, the air smells like the Blanco on a day when everyone is laughing and nobody knows what the river knows. The first tap on the door is patient. The second is not. The third is a child learning where the button is. It started the summer we moved into my uncle's old house outside of Graham, Texas. The place had been empty for close to 6 years, long enough for the paint to fade to a pale, thirsty yellow, and for the yard to choke itself with weeds. My parents said it was a fresh start, but I knew better. Fresh starts didn't come with sagging floors, drafty windows, and a basement that smelled like damp laundry left to rot in the machine. The basement was the kind of place that seemed to breathe when you stood in it too long. You could hear water trickling somewhere inside the walls, though my dad swore there were no pipes down there. The floor was poured concrete, stained with dark spots that could have been motor oil or something worse. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, and against the far wall sat an ancient tube television, the kind with big, clunky knobs and fake wood paneling. It was an ugly thing. No cable hookup, no remote. The glass screen had a spiderweb crack in one corner, and the electrical cord was wrapped in duct tape. Dad said it didn't even work anymore, so we left it down there with the rest of the junk that came with the house folding chairs. Boxes of warped vinyl records, a mattress with a suspiciously large brown stain. For the first month, the house was just uncomfortable in that way old houses are. The kind where the walls groan at night and the air smells faintly of someone else's life. But around mid-July, I started noticing little things. It began with the hum. I was getting a glass of water one night, maybe 2 in the morning, and I heard this faint, steady buzzing coming up through the floorboards. It was coming from the basement. My first thought was the water heater or the breaker box, but when I went down there, the sound was louder, richer. It was coming from the TV. The screen was on, glowing faint blue, but not showing a channel, just static. The old black and white snow I hadn't seen since before we switched to flat screens. I stood there in my socks, watching it. The static seemed heavier than I remembered, the patterns sharper. They didn't just shift randomly. They moved in little bursts, almost like they were forming shapes before melting back into noise. Then, clear as day, the screen flashed an Amiga mouth. Not a face, not eyes, just the lower half. The lips were cracked and pale, the teeth crooked, and they were moving. I didn't hear words, not out loud, but somewhere in my head, like someone whispering from inside my skull, I heard, "Don't go upstairs." That was enough to make me kill the power and bolt. My parents didn't believe me in the morning. Dad laughed and said the old set probably picked up some weird signal from a neighbor's CB radio. Mom told me to stop watching horror movies before bed the next time it happened. My little sister was the one who heard it. She's 9 and doesn't scare easy. She's the type of kid who catches frogs with her bare hands. But one night I heard her crying in her room, and when I asked why, she said, "The TV man told me I was gonna get taken." She said she'd woken up to that same faint buzzing I'd heard, gone down to the basement because she thought she heard me talking, and found the TV glowing in the dark. The static showed the same mouth, and this time it was smiling dry, split lips curling back too far. She said she didn't hear the words with her ears. They were in her head, like the mouth was talking directly to her brain. And what it said was, "They're coming for you, little girl. They're already in the house." We told our parents. Again and again, they brushed it off. But the third time it happened, Mom heard it too. It was late August, storm season. Thunder shaking the windows, rain smearing the world outside. The power flickered twice that night, but never fully went out. Around 1:30, I woke up to the sound of footsteps pounding down the hall. then the basement door creaking open. I grabbed my phone and followed. Mom was standing at the top of the basement stairs, looking down into the dark. She didn't even notice me at first. "What is it?" I whispered. Her voice was shaky when she said, "I heard someone talking down there." We both went down, her gripping the railing like she expected it to break. The TV was on again, humming, louder than before, like an electric beehive. The mouth was there, clear and sharp in the static. This time, the corners of its lips were twitching, like it was holding back laughter. The sound wasn't in my head anymore, was whispering out. Loud, low, and wet, like someone speaking with their lips pressed right against your ear. It said, 2 floors up, end of the hall. And then it smiled wider. Mom grabbed my arm so hard, her nails dug in. We ran upstairs together, half expecting to find someone standing in the hallway. But there was nothing. My sister was asleep in her bed. The doors were locked. The only sound was the rain. We tried to throw the TV out the next day. Dad and I carried it up the basement steps. At least, we tried. Halfway up, it got heavier. I don't mean we were tired heavy. I mean like the thing suddenly weighed 500 pounds. We had to set it down before it crushed us, when we left it there to catch our breath. The screen flickered to life without being plugged in. The mouth appeared instantly this time, whispering one long word over and over. Stay. We left it on the stairs for days. After that, things got worse. The whispering started in other parts of the house. We'd hear our own names, not shouted, but breathed in the kitchen, the hallway, sometimes right outside our bedroom doors. My sister started waking up with bloody noses, her sheets twisted into knots. Mom started locking her bedroom door, something she'd never done before. One night, I woke to find my sister standing in my room, her face blank. She said, "The man on the TV says you're next," and then she walked out like she was sleepwalking. I checked the basement. The TV wasn't on. But when I looked at the screen, I saw my own face in the static knot as I was, but older, bruised, and with something dark pooling in my mouth. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. 2 weeks later, the basement flooded after a heavy rain. The water rose halfway up the stairs before we could pump it out. We thought maybe that would finally ruin the TV, but when the water was gone, it was still there, perfectly dry, like the flood had gone around it. That was when Dad decided enough was enough. We were going to smash it and haul it to the dump. We took it out into the yard, set it on the grass, and hit it with a sledgehammer. The glass cracked, the wood splintered, but instead of wires and vacuum tubes inside, there was nothing. Just blackness. Not a dark interior, but a space that didn't look like it ended. Something moved inside it. Something with hands that were too long and a mouth. I recognized immediately. The last thing I remember is that mouth stretching, whispering something I couldn't make out because it wasn't in English, and then Dad screaming. When I woke up, the TV was back in the basement. Dad was gone. Mom told the sheriff he'd run off after a fight, but she hasn't gone down to the basement since. My sister won't even walk past the door. Last night, the static came on again. The mouth appeared. It wasn't smiling anymore. It said, 1 down, 2 to go. And then it licked its lips. It started the summer I turned 16, in the kind of heat that makes asphalt feel like it's breathing under your sneakers. The 4 of us, me, Cody, Tanner, and my cousin Hannah, had been bored for weeks in our small Texas town of Meridian. The kind of place where the Dairy Queen's closing time was considered a social event. We'd started doing this stupid dare game at night to keep ourselves entertained. You'd pick a house, any house, sneak up to one of its dark windows, knock 3 times, and then run like hell. It was mostly harmless. Nobody ever called the cops. Most folks were asleep or too old to get off the couch that late anyway. There was this one place, though, that had been off limits for years. Everybody called it the Carlson place, even though the Carlsons had been dead since before we were born. It was a squat, two-story farmhouse on the edge of town, surrounded by pecan trees that looked black against the moonlight. The roof sagged in the middle, the windows were dark even during the day, and the paint had peeled down to gray wood. The story went that old man Carlson had gone crazy one winter and locked his family inside. No one was sure exactly how it ended. People said they just stopped coming into town, and by spring, the house was empty. We never dared each other to go there. Not really. It was just one of those places you mentioned with a laugh and then changed the subject. But that night, the air was so heavy and still that you could hear crickets a mile away. Tanner had stolen a six-pack from his dad's fridge, and after 2 beers each, our judgment wasn't exactly sharp. "You won't do it," Cody said, shoving me in the shoulder. "Won't do what?" I asked. "Carlson Place. Second floor window." 3 knocks, Hannah groaned. "That's not even funny. You know, my mom said she saw someone in there last year. That was just some tweaker looking for a place to crash," Tanner said. "Place has been empty forever." Cody leaned in like he was telling a ghost story. "Nah, my brother said when you knock, it knocks back. From the outside, like someone's leaning out there in the dark, waiting. It should have been easy to call his bluff. Just laugh it off, move on. But I was 16 and too stupid to back down. I shrugged and said, 'Fine, let's go.' We cut across the dirt lot behind the feed store and followed the gravel road that wound past the water tower. By the time the Carlson place came into view, the beer buzz had dulled into a tense quiet. The house looked even bigger up close, the windows like empty sockets staring out into the fields. "Second floor," Cody reminded me, grinning like he'd already won something. I found the side porch steps and crept up, the wood groaning under my weight. The paint flaked off in my hand as I grabbed the railing. Inside, I could smell that old house scent dust, mold, and something sour underneath. The front door was shut tight, but the porch wrapped around to the side where a pecan branch had grown so close it brushed against the siding. The second-story window wasn't hard to reach. The tree made a kind of ladder. I climbed halfway up until I could stand on the thick branch and lean toward the glass. The moonlight hit it just enough for me to see my faint reflection. My pulse was thudding in my ears, but I balled my fist and rapped 3 times. 1, 2, 3. The sound was dull against the grime-covered glass. For a second, there was nothing. Then, from the other side, came 3 slow knocks. 1, 2, 3. I froze. The knocks didn't sound like an echo. They weren't timed right. They came a heartbeat later, harder, as if someone was standing just beyond the glass. I turned my head toward the yard, thinking maybe Cody had somehow snuck around and tapped the outside wall. But he was still down by the fence with the others, all of them staring up at me with wide eyes. The knocks came again, louder. I scrambled down the tree so fast I scraped my palms raw, and we bolted back toward town without saying a word. We didn't talk about it for a couple of days. It was easier to pretend it hadn't happened, like we'd all just heard a squirrel or something. But the thing was, once you played the game at a house, you weren't supposed to go back. And yet, a week later, Cody dared Tanner to try it. He went up to a first-floor window this time, knocked, and swore it knocked back same slow, deliberate rhythm. By the 3rd time, when Hannah tried it and came back pale and shaking, we realized something was different. It didn't just knock back anymore. It followed you. That night, Hannah called me from her bedroom, whispering like her parents might overhear. "It's here," she said. "What's here?" "The knocking." I'm in bed, and something's tapping on my window. My second-floor window. I live 3 miles from the Carlson place. I didn't know what to say. She told me she'd pulled the blinds. The knocking had started moving, first at her window, then the bathroom, then the kitchen. Always from the outside, as if whatever it was circling the house by morning. She swore it had stopped. But 2 days later, it happened to me. I woke at 2:13 a.m. to 3 sharp taps on my bedroom window. My house sat at the edge of a cornfield, with no trees close enough for anyone to climb. I didn't move, just lay there holding my breath. After a minute, it stopped. I thought maybe it had been a dream until I heard it again, this time from the living room. Then the back door. When I told Cody and Tanner, they both admitted it had happened to them too. Always 3 knocks, always moving from one window to another, like it was looking for a way in. We tried ignoring it, keeping our blinds closed, but it didn't matter. It would happen once every few nights, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. We never saw anyone out there. Just the sound of knuckles on glass, close enough to make the pane vibrate. It went on for weeks. Then Tanner stopped showing up to hang out. His mom said he'd been sleeping over at his uncle's place in Waco. A month later, Cody left for Austin to stay with his brother. Hannah stopped answering my texts altogether. The last time I heard from her was in September. She sent me a single message at 2:14 a.m. It's inside, no one's seen her since the cops searched her house and found the front door locked from the inside. Her phone on the kitchen counter. No signs of forced entry. 2 weeks after that, I moved in with my aunt in Abilene. I haven't been back to Meridian. Last night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., I woke to 3 slow knocks on my bedroom window. From the outside, and now it's moving. Room to room, I don't think it ever stopped following us. It just finally found a way in. I never thought I'd move back to Llano, Texas. I left when I was 19, swearing I'd never again breathe the sticky summer air that seemed to coat your lungs like syrup. Never again feel the grit from the Llano River crunch between my toes. Never again see the dead-eyed stares of a town where nothing changes except the number of names in the obituary section of the Llano News. But life's a long road with some cruel curves. When my mom got sick lungs full of fluid from years working the feed store and a lifetime of cheap cigarettes, I packed up what little I had in Austin and came back. The old house was the same, down to the dent in the front porch rail where my cousin Clay and I used to balance bottle rockets. The floorboards still sagged in the hallway. The smell of cedar and dust hit me as soon as I opened the door. She was already in a hospital bed by then, a rented one squeezed into her bedroom. I took the back room I'd had as a kid. And that's where this whole thing began. I need to explain something about that room. It had a set of old, mismatched bunk, bed top and bottom made of thick oak, varnish peeling off in flakes. The bottom mattress had always been mine. The top bunk sat unused most of my childhood, except for when Clay slept over. He was the only one who didn't mind the creaks and the way the ladder swayed. Mom had offered to take the bunks apart years ago, but I never wanted her to. I couldn't explain why, even as a kid. They just felt like part of the room. Like the scuffed dresser or the window that never quite closed all the way. The first night back, I crashed hard. I'd been up for 30 hours between moving, checking on Mom at the hospital, and sorting through boxes she'd left piled in the kitchen. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No reason I could pinpoint. The street outside was quiet, except for a lone cicada winding down its call. The air felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm. That's when I heard it counting soft, breathless, like someone whispering numbers. Into the dust, it was coming from under the lower bunk. At first, I thought it was a dream, or maybe my phone playing something. I slid my hand down the side of the bed, half expecting to feel my phone vibrating in the charger. But my phone was on the nightstand. The counting was slow and deliberate. 1, 2, 3. Each number was in perfect rhythm with my breaths. I noticed that without even meaning to inhale, and the whisper ticked forward one number. Exhale, another. I froze. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps at shadows. But something about hearing that counting so close to my face, right where my legs dangled off the mattress, triggered something deep in me. My skin prickled like I'd walked into a freezer. I told myself it was just the old house settling. Sound carries weird in places like this. I cleared my throat, trying to make some noise. The counting stopped instantly. I stayed awake for another hour, heart racing. Finally, I convinced myself it had been a trick of my tired brain and drifted back off. The next day, I wrote it off. Sleep deprivation does weird things. I spent the day with Mom, then came home around midnight. I wasn't ready to sleep yet. So I sat at my desk by the window, laptop open, sipping a Lone Star and watching moths slam into the glass. When I finally crawled into bed, it kept one foot planted firmly on the mattress, not letting it hang over the edge. Around 3:15 a.m., it came again. The counting, but this time, it started the moment I lay still. 1, 2. It matched my breathing perfectly. I tried an experiment, quickened my breath, making it short and uneven. The counting followed, each whispered number tumbling out faster, like it was trying to keep up. My pulse pounded in my ears. I slowed my breathing to almost nothing, shallow sips of air. The counting slowed with me. That's when I realized it wasn't just matching my breaths, it was measuring them. I didn't want to look under the bed. Every part of my brain screamed not to. Instead, I forced myself to shift in bed and say out loud, "Hello?" The counting stopped. And then, after maybe 5 seconds, I heard something scrape against the floorboards under me. Just once. Then, silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, pulled the bed away from the wall and crouched down to look underneath. Nothing but dust bunnies, a lost sock, and the faint outline of where the bunk bed's legs had sat for decades. No sign anyone or anything had been there. I considered sleeping on the couch. But Mom's room was right off the living room, and she needed rest. So I stayed in my old room again that night, telling myself I'd imagined everything. But the counting came back. Every night, it never happened when I was moving, talking, or reading. Only when I was in bed, still. The voice was always the same low, almost like a child's, but dry. Like someone whispering through paper. On the 6th night, I decided to try something different. I pretended to sleep, kept my breathing slow, and even the counting followed. When it reached what I guessed was 40, I suddenly held my breath, staying as still as possible. The counting paused, then the whisper came again. But this time, instead of a number, it said my name, clear as day, Evan. I flinched hard enough to make the mattress groan. Silence. I reached for my phone and fumbled to turn on the flashlight. The beam hit the floor, then under the bed. Nothing, no shadow, no movement. Just empty space. The next morning, I brought it up to Mom, half expecting her to laugh. But instead, she looked down at her hands. "You hearing it too?" she asked quietly. That stopped me cold. She told me when I was a baby. Before my dad left, she used to hear someone counting in the middle of the night, always under the bed. She tried to ignore it, but sometimes it would say her name. She swore she even saw something once, just a hand, pale and thin, curling back into the darkness when she looked under there. She said it stopped after my dad left. She thought it was stress. But maybe it wasn't. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat up in bed with my phone recording, the mic aimed at the floor. Around 2:58 a.m., the counting began again. My heart hammered, but I kept the phone steady. 1, 2, 3. Then my name. Then a long pause. And then, in a tone that almost sounded amused, it said, "Stop pretending." I dropped the phone. The voice laughed. I've heard it every night since. It doesn't care if I'm awake now. Doesn't care if I try to drown it out with music. The counting cuts through. It's always in time with my breathing. Sometimes it speeds up before I do, like it knows when I'm about to panic. And last night was the first time I woke up to find myself under the bunk, flat on my back, counting. It was one of those sticky late summer nights in East Texas when the air feels too thick to breathe and even the crickets sound tired. I had just gotten off a late shift at the Dollar General on the edge of town, and I was bone tired in that way where you start zoning out behind the wheel. My mom and dad had driven into Dallas for the weekend to see my aunt, leaving me in charge of the house. I was 19 at the time, still living at home while saving for community college. I'd done it before, kept the place locked up, fed the dog, made sure the lights were off at night. No big deal. But that night, nothing about it felt normal. The neighborhood was quiet when I pulled into the driveway. Our street in Tyler isn't exactly rural, but it's far enough from the main drag that after dark, it feels isolated. The kind of quiet where you notice every sound your car cooling off. A dog barking 2 streets over, the soft whine of cicadas. In the trees, I locked the car and made my way up the path, my sneakers sticking a little to the concrete from the heat still radiating off it. The porch light was on, throwing that yellow-orange glow that made every shadow seem thicker. Inside, the air conditioning hit me like a blessing. I tossed my keys on the counter, grabbed a glass of water, and stood there a moment, just listening. The house had that still, hollow sound it gets when no one's been in it all day. No TV in the background, no footsteps from upstairs. Just the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking clock on the wall. I headed to my room, changed into shorts and a t-shirt, and lay on my bed scrolling through my phone. Maybe half an hour passed before I heard the sound of my mom's voice calling from the kitchen. "Sweetie, can you bring me a glass of water?" It was casual, warm, exactly how she sounded every night when she'd come home from work and settle into the couch. I didn't think twice at first. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and started down the hallway. I'd taken maybe 3 steps when the house phone rang. We don't use the house phone much. It's one of those old cordless models with a crackly speaker, but my parents keep it for emergencies. I almost ignored it, figuring it was spam, but something made me stop and grab it from the wall cradle in the hallway. "Hello," I said. There was a pause, and then my dad's voice came through. Low and serious. "Don't go into the kitchen," he said. "We're not home tonight." The words hit me like a cold wave. I stood there, heart thudding, staring at the dark hallway toward the kitchen. "What?" I whispered. My voice cracked. I said, "Don't go in there," he repeated. "Stay where you are." I'm calling the sheriff." "Just hang up, go to your room, and lock the door." I was frozen. My brain couldn't make sense of it. My parents were 2 hours away. I'd watched them back out of the driveway earlier that day. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant when, from the kitchen, my mom's voice called again, a little louder this time. "Sweetie, did you hear me? Bring me a glass of water." The line went dead. I stood there in the hallway, caught between the phone in my hand and that voice drifting from the kitchen. The air felt wrong now, like the house itself was holding its breath. I could see the faint glow of the fridge light spilling onto the tile, but the rest of the kitchen was shadowed. I couldn't see anyone in there from where I stood. "Mom," I called, my voice trembling. Silence for a beat. Then, from just around the corner, the same warm, familiar tone. "Come here, sweetheart." I don't know what made me take a step back, but I did. My heel hit the hallway wall, and I realized my hands were shaking so badly I could hear the phone rattling in my grip. I swallowed hard and tried to think logically.
Maybe someone had broken in.
Maybe they'd heard me say mom and were trying to trick me. But the voice wasn't close to an impression. It was perfect. Every inflection, every breath between words, it was her. I backed into my room, shut the door, and locked it. I was halfway across the room toward my window when the voice came again, this time from right outside my bedroom door. "Sweetie, why'd you lock the door? I just asked for some water." It wasn't loud, but it was clear. I could hear the faint rasp of her breath, the way she always sounded after laughing. I pressed myself against the far wall, gripping my phone like it was a weapon. My mind was racing. I wanted to call my dad back, but the line was dead. I tried my service. Just one of those sudden dead zones that happens out here sometimes, where no matter what you do, your phone might as well be a brick. The doorknob rattled. "I know you can hear me." The voice said, still sweet, still patient, "Don't be silly." I didn't answer. My breath was coming too fast now, my ears straining for any sound from outside my room. Then I heard its soft, deliberate footsteps moving away from the door, down the hall, toward the living room. The house went quiet again. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the door, afraid to even blink. Then I heard something else faint, like the scrape of a chair leg against the kitchen tile, followed by the steady sound of the fridge. Door creaking open, then shutting. I stayed locked in my room until I saw flashing red and blue lights sweep across my window. The sheriff's deputies came in, guns drawn, and I heard them calling out as they cleared the house. When they finally opened my bedroom door, one of them, a tall guy with a gray mustache, looked at me strangely. "You alone here?" he asked. I nodded. My voice didn't want to work. "My parents are in Dallas. They searched the house top to bottom. No sign of forced entry. No footprints on the porch, not even in the soft dirt under the windows. The back door was locked. From the inside, the only thing they found out of place was a single glass sitting in the middle of the kitchen table, filled to the brim with water. I stayed with a neighbor that night, and when my parents came back the next day, I told them everything. My mom tried to reassure me, saying maybe I dreamed it, or maybe the house phone picked up some kind of interference that made it sound like my dad's voice. But when I asked if they'd called me at all, she shook her head. "We didn't touch the phone once," she said. "The thing that really gets me apart, I still can't explain, is that the sheriff told me their call logs showed the house phone had been disconnected for over 6 months. It shouldn't have been able to ring at all, and sometimes, on hot summer nights when I'm alone in the house, I'll hear it again from the kitchen, her voice, just as warm and familiar as ever. 'Sweetie, can you bring me a glass of water?' Now, I never go to the kitchen, because I'm not sure what's waiting there, and I'm terrified one night I'll find out."